So I think I'm probably safe in assuming that most of you have been to the Texas state capitol, right? Or at least seen a picture of it. Or at least know where it is at the very least, right? Most of us know what the state capitol looks like. In fact, it's a building that is known throughout the country. Some people can recognize the Texas state capitol better than our nation's capital. And in fact, people around the world can sometimes recognize the Texas state capitol. It's a sight to behold, right? It's a beautiful building. It has grand architecture, and the inside is beautiful as well. So it stands for something more than simply being a building, though, right? It's a place where we put some of our trust and some of our hope. It's a place that stands for what our government in this state should be. So if someone came and, as you were admiring the building, thinking about what it stood for, and they said to you, not a stone will be left on stone here. This entire building will crumble and fall, will be destroyed by your enemies. That would strike to your heart more than just the idea of a building coming down, right? There's a deeper meaning to the Texas state capitol falling down than simply the end of a building. Now the Jewish people who heard Jesus say, this temple will be destroyed, not a stone will be left on stone, it will crumble and fall, and it will be no more. They had even more stock in that building than we do in our state capitol. For you see, God had promised the Jewish people that God would be there, in that place, in that building. That was God's dwelling place. And so when they heard from Jesus, not a stone will be left on stone, this saying surely struck fear into their hearts. For if not a stone was left on stone, where would they go to find God? Where would God dwell, if not in the temple at Jerusalem? This is how we feel sometimes about human institutions, whether it's a building or some sort of societal institution, right? There are certain things that if they fell, it would strike fear in our hearts. It would make us worried about our future, about our place, and about where God would be in the midst of that. There are things that we put our trust in that we would hate to see fall. But part of what Jesus is saying in this text today is that human institutions, whether they are buildings or governments or churches or schools or whatever it may be that we have created with our hands or with our minds, these things will fall. They are not the place in which we are called to put our hope, our trust, our faith, for they will crumble and fall. What Jesus is saying to those gathered and to us is that we are called to put our hope in something greater. We are called to put our hope in the one who promises new life and resurrection, the one who has promised a new heavens and a new earth. This peace that Jesus speaks here is frequently called Luke's apocalypse. Now, when you hear the word apocalypse, you hear fear and death and end, right? That is what we have learned apocalypse means. Think about the whole genre of movies like The Day After Tomorrow or Apocalypse Now or other movies where the world ends, right? These movies are frequently disaster or even terror movies. There's a whole genre of books called post-apocalyptic novels, and they're all about what happens after the world ends. And it's usually a scary place. apocalypse makes us scared. But apocalypse as a genre in the Bible is actually a genre of hope. The point of apocalypse is not to make you scared about what is to come, but to put your hope farther beyond the end of our human things. The point of apocalypse is to say, God reigns. God reigns now, and God will reign even when things are literally or figuratively crumbling around you. Apocalypse says there's more, and it's better. So when Jesus tells the people this, perhaps at first they are scared, but the point is to lead them to a greater hope. In fact, the writer of Luke and the first hearers and readers of Luke would have already experienced the destruction of the temple. It happened. The enemies of the Jews came and destroyed their temple before the writing of this gospel. And so they had already experienced what they thought would be the end of their world. So these words that Jesus speaks to them do bring hope, because they know what the worst can look like. And so they look forward with hope to the best. It's not for us to know, Jesus says in various places, when these things will happen. He gives the disciples some signs in this text. There will be wars and earthquakes and famine and plagues. Nation will rise up against nation. Kingdoms will rise and fall. That's when you know this is coming. But it won't come immediately, he says. There have been earthquakes and famines and plagues and wars for as long as human history has existed, so it seems like it's not our job to try to figure out which of these signifies the end is near. In fact, in other texts, Jesus specifically tells his hearers, it is not for you to know. In fact, even the Son doesn't know, but only the Father knows the time. The time when the world as it is will end and a new heaven and new earth will be created. The time when the kingdom will be fully established on earth as in heaven. The time when God's reign will be known to all. It is not for us to know. It's not for us to try to figure it out and sit down and use our analysis to try to figure out when Christ is returning. It is our job to live as if it's happening tomorrow. And just like the genre of apocalypse is not meant to bring fear, the idea that the world could end tomorrow is not supposed to bring fear to us. It's supposed to bring hope. Because the end of the world as we know it, the end of our human institutions means God's kingdom come. It means a place as described in Isaiah, where people live long, healthy, happy lives, where there's no weeping, no distress, no war, no famine, no pain, and no death. If the world ends tomorrow, it means those things come tomorrow. And so we look forward with joy. And we are called to live our lives as if that day is tomorrow. Jesus gives us instructions about what it means to live as if the kingdom is coming tomorrow. As if God's reign will be fully established tomorrow. He tells us, feed the hungry, clothe the naked, care for the sick, lift up the lowly, be there for the oppressed and those who suffer from injustice here and now. And he calls us to do those things not because what we do will bring the kingdom faster or better, but because when we work for the ways of the kingdom now, we become more like the people who will live in the kingdom. For when the kingdom comes, when our human institutions, when our ways come to an end, so too must our ways of creating war, of creating death, of hoarding for ourselves so that famine and hunger and sickness still exists. When the kingdom comes, we will have to relearn what it means to be children of God, to be those created in the image of the Creator. When the kingdom comes, we will have to learn how to be like God. And so when we live in God's ways now, we begin to live into the future. We begin to live like children of God. And so today that means in a world filled with war, with famine, with natural disaster, with death, we bring peace. We bring food to the hungry. We bring help to the broken and love and the promise of resurrection to those in the midst of death. Today that means in a nation where we have spent months tossing hatred back and forth, we bring love. In a nation where the oppressed are scared, we bring hope. In a nation where people are being attacked for who they voted for the color of their skin, for the way they choose to live their lives, for the way they were born, we say, you are loved, and I'll prove it to you. And we lift up the lowly, and we bring up those who suffer from injustice, and we fight against the real oppression that exists even today. For as we do this, we show the world the face of Christ. As we do this, we remember what God's kingdom will be like. As we do this, we look forward with hope and joy to the time when Christ will reign eternally. When we do this, we show that we worship the God of new life and resurrection, of love for all people. We worship the God who lifts up the lowly and brings down the haughty so that all stand on equal footing in the eyes of God. We worship the one who, even when our institutions crumble and fall around us, was and is to come. Thanks be to God. Amen. Amen.